skills base and everything else that we have here. So Leigh, you're very welcome indeed. Please welcome Leigh Meyer.
Good morning. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the outside view looking in, and I think 5 years ago it would have been very much the outsider looking in. I've now been here for that 5-year period, and it's very much I'm looking out as well as in. What I want to do today is give you some perspectives from my organization. I'm not sure that everybody would be familiar with Citi. When I do talk to them about Citigroup or Citi, I do get mixed feelings, and people think, isn't that a bank, or is that maybe something to do with taxis or various other things. So I'm just going to lay it out, and I'm going to try and narrow it down into a perspective where I can actually put some real personal input into the way that I think that Northern Ireland has responded to the challenge of investment. Citi is the third largest American bank. We are a number of various financial pillars. We are an investment bank, we are a consumer bank, we're a private bank. But the bit here in Belfast concentrates primarily on the investment banking side. And I want to talk a little bit about what we actually do here in Belfast and a little bit about how we do it. And then I'm going to talk about my particular business, which is foreign exchange. It's a wonderfully exciting business. It's very big, and when I start to talk to people about what happens here in Northern Ireland, I often get a reaction that it's phenomenal how important Northern Ireland is to the global economy. So the timeline for Citi in Northern Ireland goes back 8 years now, and the original investment was in 2005 for 375 jobs, and these were essentially technology. And 2 years later, in January 2007, the view was taken that we would start investing from the operational side. And sometimes, I get the question, what really does operations do? So if I can distill that down to something very simple, we move assets, we try and move them at the right time, the right amount, to the right place, to the right people. So we don't execute deals here. What we do is once the deal's been executed, we actually do all the guts and the necessary to ensure that the client is made whole. And of course, it also has a perspective of ensuring that we have a segregation between the business that executes and the operational side for the soundness and for the regulation side. In May 2007, legal and compliance moved 40 roles to Belfast. And to my knowledge, that is the first and only investment made from a legal perspective, certainly for banking, outside of the core centres. In September 2010, we celebrated 1,000 jobs in Belfast. In 2011, we became one of 28 strategic locations. And what I mean by that is that Citi operates in 102 different countries. We have somewhere in the region of 250 million bank accounts, and there's a constant review of where we want to ensure our strategic footprint is maximized. And so Belfast competes against a whole range of locations. And here in Europe, we've narrowed it down to 4. We have a Dublin centre, which has major tax incentives. We have Belfast, we have a centre in Poland, and we have a centre in Budapest. In 2013, we've just completed the movement of HR functions from London into Belfast. This is very significant. Effectively, what we have now is an operation in Belfast servicing not just Europe, but servicing the Middle East and Africa, about 55 countries. And for Northern Ireland to have got the vote for that particular movement, I think says a lot about how the diversity of Citi is viewed within the senior leadership of our organization. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Belfast population profile. And this will just give you some context as to where these roles are and what they are and who we recruit and why we recruit them. There's a stat on this that's just quite striking, is that our male-female mix is almost on a ratio of 2 to 1. And that's primarily because most of the jobs here are technology-based. And a previous speaker noted that there was a dearth of technology skills. I won't refute that. I would just say that we have had a very successful recruitment and development program for our technology groups here. I don't know why it tends to be male biased. Certainly in the operations world, we have roughly about 50-50. But that would probably account for the bias on the statistics. There's something else that I wanted to just allude to here, and it doesn't really come out on this particular profile. But being a global business and being a very European-focused business, we were very worried at the time of moving that we wouldn't have the necessary skills to support the European business and the requirement for native language speakers. And I am delighted to say that that was completely dispelled. Through the recruitment program, we found local language speakers based here in Belfast. We have French, Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish people employed who are talking to their counterparts and enhancing the client experience. We have a little bit of a shortage with German, but that doesn't really, not really a big problem because most Germans speak very, very good English. The one thing that we are a little bit short of right now, and it's something that I'm going to allude to and I'm going to talk about, is the fact that we need to develop some senior managers here. Most of the senior management, like myself, have come from London. That base is slowly being whittled away, and hopefully I can convey an understanding of how we are taking talent from Northern Ireland and developing it into the managers of tomorrow. The attrition rates here in Belfast are particularly low. They are low relative to comparative businesses in Citi Group. They are also low comparative to the other businesses in the industry. And one of the things that has been reflected in the surveys that we conduct on staff is that they are very pleased with the levels of inward mobility. And that sits at around 20%. So what does that mean? That means that 1 in 5 people are moving to a different job within Citi on an annual basis. I took a sheet here from the strategic document that we put together and we present to our board, we present to regulators, we present to the government. And I wanted to just highlight here that the fact that this is a very cyclical arrangement and how important it is that we are utilizing the infrastructure and the partners that we have here in Northern Ireland. I've talked a little bit about the talent, and one of the primary objectives is that we look at the well-educated workforce. They are incredibly useful and diverse skills in the universities, and it's very easy to see why there is perhaps a little reluctance to get involved with banking. And the word-of-mouth program that we have that communicates with the Queen's and Ulster has helped us to target a large group of very, very qualified individuals. The graduate talent pool is something that we identify within the organization. So we take grads and then we'll further segregate that out and start looking at individuals who we believe have got not necessarily technical talent, but really leadership talent. And the customer service culture is paramount in banking, and you can imagine that it is very visible to everywhere within the organization. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that when we get onto the perception piece. The people strategy is a joint venture between the operations management, the legal management, technical management, and the HR. And I've distilled out these 4 themes here, primarily because I think they just really reflect what we are trying to do. We are looking at technical skills, clearly, particularly on the technology side, learning base codes. On the operations side, there is an element of technical skill required. A lot of that can be done through textbooks. The focus would be on the leadership and on the soft skills. That's really what we are looking at for the long term. As far as diversity is concerned, we look at diversity not just in terms of the number of people that we can bring in from different cultures and from different backgrounds, but also from the different disciplines. So that's a very important part of the way that we've actually gone about recruiting for the organization. And the interesting thing is that I was in the House of Fraser on Saturday. I had to do some errands, and the lady that was serving me said, "Oh, are you from New Zealand?" I said, "No, I'm not. I'm actually from Zimbabwe." And she said, "Oh, well, and why are you here?" And I said, "Well, I'm here because I work for Citi Group." She said, "Oh, I've been meaning to apply for some of the roles there." I said, "Well, that's great. You know, what do you want to do?" And she said, "Well, I've got a master's in psychology." And I said, "Well, that's excellent because we've just opened up a huge HR area here. So, here's my card. Please drop me your CV and we'll see what we can do." And I think the point here is that we're not just looking for people with engineering and mathematical and finance and business degrees. We are looking at guys that and ladies that can bring in a whole diversity of skills at a tertiary education level. I'm going to skip over this slide but I just want to make a couple of things. And this emphasizes how we actually hold together the people strategy. And there's a lot of thought that goes into how do we look at using these resources. Bearing in mind that we are competing against places like Poland, we are competing against places like Budapest. How do we identify Belfast as being the premier area? So when a business says, "I'm going to outsource from London," why would they choose Belfast? And when we produce this slide and we take people through and we can demonstrate both from a quantitative and from a qualitative perspective how important it is and how well that we actually develop people, we get a very favorable response. And I think that's reflected in the fact that the HR group had decided to move here. These particular balloons or these particular areas are areas of focus in what we measure called the VOE, the voice of the employee. And this is an annual event, and it's kicked off last week. And what we will ask our staff is a set of questions, about 60 in total, and it'll cover these various aspects. And where we see negative or responses that need to be improved, we target those, and they become part of these core strategic pillars for the people strategy. But there's one other point here that I would like to just note as far as the people strategies are concerned, and that over the last 5 years, Belfast has led the voice of the employee satisfaction levels on a European basis, and last year, for the first time, it started to challenge the Asian base. Now, without being disparaging, the results in Asia are almost phenomenally difficult to believe. Everybody seems to be extremely happy in their jobs. So we take that with the target that it is, and we're mildly optimistic that this year is going to be a good year. We have put an awful lot of demand on people, and through the questions that we were asked there, it's staggering how much we have actually asked our people to do, and that sometimes can reflect in slightly negative responses in the sense that people are working long hours and they're working very hard. I wanted to talk a little bit about culture and why this is important for Citi. And this selection of photographs here looks at the activities both from an internal and from an external relationship standpoint. And in the center there is Bernardo's, and Bernardo's is the charity that Citi has chosen this year as the charity that is going to receive all the fundraising that we do internally. And that's decided by the staff. It is a very, very well-received effort from the organisation. We raise somewhere in the region of £10,000 to £15,000 on an annual basis. It is an important part. We do like to get the individuals to decide where they would like to invest. There are a wide variety of events. The donkey there represents a volunteer day that Citi gives to everybody within the organisation. This year, I think it was June the 22nd, and everybody from senior management through to the newest recruit is offered that day to go and do diverse activities, planting trees, cleaning beaches, painting community centres. It's really about putting something back. Okay, we're going to talk about talent, and this little slide here is, I think, a reflection of our empowerment program. I gave my PA the brief and said, please go and put some slides together. I don't want too much script. I would actually like to just talk about, what we're doing here, and you can put in what you think represents the topics. And I gave her the headings, and she said, this one represents talent, which I can see why. But we'll move on to the actual the nitty-gritty of this. So what is this about? So this is a program. The development of talent, it's an obvious target. It's an obvious goal for anybody in our business. But this is how we actually do it. And we have all three core groups. In fact, when we update the slide, we're going to have to put HR into that cylinder as well. And they meet together and they spend 3 weeks and they familiarize themselves with what they are doing and they'll familiarize themselves with the organization. We will give them an element of our core principles. We try and get people starting to think a little bit more on the global perspective. And it's amazing how integrated that becomes very, very quickly because you are combining law grads with finance grads with technical grads. And within 3 weeks, they're all pretty much aligned together in some way or another. We then separate them and do a more intense program. And that's where the legal stream, the operations stream, and the technology streams are separated out. The academy model was developed initially for the technology groups. I never really understood why they needed to go back to school because they all seemed so smart anyway. But they've come back and they've said this is a really beneficial way of integrating into this organization. And I think it's the transition from the theoretical to the practical side. There are huge demands put on people very, very quickly, and they've responded well. And having a formal background and a formal understanding, a chance to meet leaders from their business, leaders from the government, helps them put in perspective what their responsibilities are very early on. This is I think this is a slide that illustrates what Ed Miliband did before he got into politics. But I wanted to talk a little bit about perception, and this is a very, very significant part of Northern Ireland as far as our organization is concerned. So I'm going to go back to a situation in 2007 where we had moved a business out of New York into a place called Buffalo up in northwestern New York, and it had been a disaster, and primarily a disaster because the client service aspect had been completely eroded. And if we looked at it and said, why did that happen, you would have identified very quickly that the problem was that we had very smart people, we had very willing employees, but we had very, very poor training. And a year later, when I was asked whether we could move the operations out of London into Belfast, I said, we can go and we can do this on one condition. And that condition is that I am going to take the business with me. So I'm going to relocate, initially on a 2-year contract, to Belfast. And with me, I need to take around about 1 in 10 experts to new recruits. And that was accepted. I had a lot of reluctance from our business. They pointed out to the disaster in North America, which I'd been very much involved in solving. I had to give very heart open and very candid responses to questions to the seniors who said, you are effectively putting our whole franchise at risk should this fail. But I felt confident that given the parallels between Buffalo and Belfast, that we could make this a success. It wasn't going to be a question of whether we had people with the right aptitude. We were going to find people with the right attitude. And through the recruitment process, it was very obvious there were a lot of very, very keen people looking to join the organization. We we're pushing very hard to look for team players. And you might say, well, that seems to be a bit glib. But the selection process does identify very strongly how we can find whether a person is going to be part of a group or whether they're going to be standalone. And within a few weeks of recruitment, we started to see the benefits of the policy. So around about June 2008, I came over for an initial look at Belfast, where I was going to live. I decided it was far too difficult, so I gave that responsibility to my wife. She chose, and she chose well, and her and my son are happily living down the road and we are very happy here. And that made a big difference, because the initial thought was, well, why don't you try and look at commuting between here and London? And after 20 years in London and hour-and-a-half commutes every morning and every evening, you soon realize that a 10-minute drive down the A2 is a lot more satisfying. So from my perspective, it was very, very easy to integrate into Belfast. But I was still fighting a considerable uphill battle with perception in the UK. And it wasn't just from my business, it was from the other operations groups who felt very threatened. Here was a major operations group. We took ballpark 120 people out of London and said their whole unit is going to relocate to Belfast. And some of the defensive mechanisms put up by the other operations group were, well, this is a very easy product. They've got very simple processes. They've got very good technology. You can't really apply that across the spectrum. And slowly that has had to be reassessed. And if you look at the spectrum of businesses that we now have here in Belfast, certainly from an operations group, any one of the investment banking disciplines that you would read about or see about are represented here in Belfast. So the perception that the products were too sophisticated or too risky to move out of London or out of a centre where we had a lot more experience has been completely debunked. The questions then came about, what about dealing with the market pressures and the timelines? I mean, our business is really about making sure that things happen at the right time. And there was a lot of concern that people wouldn't get the sense of urgency that can occur. In fact, yesterday was a particularly good example. A lot of pressure yesterday, a big day in the financial markets. And they were pushing back and saying, well, I don't think they're really going to get how important this is that we get this right. And then, of course, there's the other side of this coin, in the sense that people in Belfast had a little bit of reluctance to compare themselves to what their peers were in London. I heard many times, oh, well, this is just little old Belfast. You know, we can't really compete with London. And things like, well, you know, those guys in London have been doing this for years. And there is an element of truth to that, but in fact, it is complete myth. The bank itself has there's nothing that the bank does that expects Belfast to fail on. And what I mean by that is they expect exactly the same kind of service in Belfast as they would do if we were servicing out of London, out of Frankfurt, Johannesburg, or any other centre. There's no compromise on that. And at no stage did we ever have to go to them and say, well, we're just in a learning phase here in Belfast. Perhaps we could, you could just cut us some slack and we can do this better next time. There wasn't a single instance of that, and there hasn't been in my 5 years here. And I want to relay one of the most important parts of this acid test of whether Belfast was going to succeed. And many of you may know that this week celebrates the 5th anniversary, if celebration is the right word, of the Lehman's failure. And in July 2008, we brought a group of 100 people into operations. September 2008, we now hit them with Lehman's. I think it's equivalent of taking someone who has just learned to drive and ask them to drive a Formula One race. The responsibilities, the focus, the intensity of that whole period, and it wasn't a few days, it went on for 3 months, really gravitated how important and how well Belfast was doing as a centre. And that is primarily down to the aptitude and the attitude of the individuals that we recruited. And the kind of comparisons that we were looking at is that within a very short space, we were seeing people that were starting to wonder why they were working reasonably long hours. The average day for a person in my business would be from around about 8 until about 6. And during this particular period, for 2 weeks, we were working somewhere between 12 and 16-hour days. And some people were going home, dressing, coming back straight back in. And you'd say, well, why would you do that? The facts are fairly well published and can be read about as to what the implications of this particular failure meant. But if we hadn't done that, and we had caused further problems, not just from a city perspective, but from a more importantly from a global perspective, I think the focus on Belfast would have been very, very different. And I want to just add one other element to this, is that Lehman's grabs the headlines. Lehman's is always going to be the one part of this particular crisis that everyone remembers. But on the Monday of that particular week, or the week that the failure was really starting to take shape, I was in London and I got a call from the head of the FX business globally. And he'd been talking to Tim Geithner, who at the time was the senior regulatory official in the US, and he had asked how quickly we could get AIG into shape in terms of allaying market fears about default. And he phoned me, and this was at 2 o'clock, and I had a 4 o'clock flight. And he said, how quickly can we put AIG into a secure state? And I'd said to him, luckily we've started looking at this. It usually takes 3 months. He said, we've got until this evening to do that. I said, well, I'm on my way back to Belfast now. I'll call you when I land. So at 7 o'clock when I got into the office and I conveyed the message, and they were busy processing this through, they said we were about 4 hours away from completing this exercise. And I said, well, that's good news. The problem is we've only got 3. At 10 o'clock there's a cut-off time. New York closes at 5. It's 10 o'clock here. We have to have this completed. Now, we'd already been pushing these guys tremendously hard. And now this focus came. And I am delighted to say that the real problem that AIG could have imposed on the markets was allayed by the fact that the guys here, sitting in the Gateway building just down the road, managed to get the whole portfolio of their settlement into shape for settlement that evening. So effectively accelerating a 3-month time window into no more than a few hours. And that would have dwarfed any of the Lehman stories. I don't know if any of you know how big it was, but I will give you a magnitude of roughly about 4 times as big as Lehman's as a problem, should we not have been able to do that as quickly as we did. So that, in terms of perception, I think straightens out a lot of views, not only from my seniors, but also from the market. And I tell that story with great pleasure to anybody that would listen. I've never had the opportunity to tell an audience this big. It's usually to people in the European Central Bank or to the Bank of England, and they know that this was an important event. And I tell them that this is primarily because of the quality of the people that we had in Belfast and how quickly and how responsive they were to the changes that they were facing. So this final slide is about, it looks like a consultant slide, and how do they really add value? And I want to just look at this from a longer perspective and put the 5 years in context. In the 5 years that I've been looking after Belfast, we have seen a 400% increase in volume. And you may say, well, actually, you've also seen a lot more people come into your organization. And I want to just put that in context. We have seen a 400% increase in volume. We have also seen a major move into the other products. So people that were originally in my world are now working in other areas. And the diversity of the products that we support has actually resulted in that figure representing pure productivity that it suggests. In other words, we can do 400 times more than we did at the start of those 5 years. We have much lower exception levels. We have much lower risk. And in my business, risk is significant. You know, we are responsible for moving somewhere in the region of $500 billion every day through our channels, and that's just in Belfast. And the point I want to make about the value add is that people will often look at Belfast and say, well, actually, it's just a cheap location, and you're lucky that you've got some good universities and you've got the right strategy there. The fact is that the cost arbitrage element is completely dispelled. You know, we do comparisons with many, many other areas, and of course, it often comes up, how well do we do in India, how well do we do in China? And Belfast is head and shoulders above any of those areas. I want to just finally talk a little bit about some of the development of talent here, and close this off with how we've taken a group of people who had very limited banking experience and put them into a situation where this is now the premier processing center for Citigroup, and certainly for the investment bank. We have homegrown our managers now, and the managers would be looking after somewhere in the region of 20 to 25 people. They are well disciplined in all the requirements from an investment banking standpoint. They are well versed in the regulatory requirements that face us, and those are not insurmountable. We have 18 assistant managers in our group right now, and this is people with somewhere between 2 and 4 years of experience who are now facing off against seniors in London and New York on a daily basis. The one gap that we need to close is to get someone to take over my role, and we reckon that could be somewhere between 2 and 5 years. But at that point, we would have completely removed the operations out of London and relocated them to Belfast. And I think if you look at what we're doing as an organization and what the industry is doing, there could be no greater endorsement of how successful Belfast is to say that the whole of the operations for the investment bank of Citigroup is based here in this country. Thank you.